In the summer of 1941, as the world edged toward total war, few nations appeared as unexpectedly formidable as Imperial Japan. To understand just how powerful Japan truly was during the Second World War, you have to step inside the mindset of a nation that had spent decades transforming itself from a feudal archipelago into a modern industrial empire. The rise did not happen overnight. It was the product of generations of reform, ambition, and a determination to avoid the fate that befell many Asian territories under European imperial domination. Japan's leaders believed that survival depended on strength, and strength required expansion, technology, discipline, and absolute national unity. By the late 1930s, Japan had built one of the most fearsome military machines in the world, a force that would shock the Western powers in the opening months of the war. At the beginning of the 20th century, Japan had already displayed its rising power by defeating the Russian Empire in 1905, stunning the world and proving that a non-Western nation could challenge a major European power. This victory was more than symbolic. It gave Japan confidence, prestige, and access to territories that would later play strategic roles in the Pacific War. The military leadership became convinced that Japan's destiny lay in dominating East Asia and the Pacific. By the 1930s, as the world slipped into economic depression, Japan's dependence on imported resources made expansion seem not only desirable, but essential. Oil, steel, rubber, and food, Japan lacked all of these in sufficient quantities. The logic of many Japanese strategists was simple: either secure resources through conquest or risk national collapse. By 1937, Japan had already plunged into full-scale war with China. This conflict revealed the brutal efficiency of Japan's armies. The Imperial Japanese Army fielded more than 1 million soldiers, well-trained, indoctrinated, and hardened by years of combat. They relied heavily on speed, surprise, and aggressive offensive operations that aimed to break the enemy's will quickly. Japanese infantry tactics emphasized night attacks, infiltration, and close-quarters combat. While technologically, they lacked some of the more advanced armor and heavy artillery seen in Europe. Their discipline and ferocity often compensated for these shortcomings. In the skies, the situation was even more striking. Japan's fighter pilots, already veterans of the China War, gained invaluable combat experience. Their machines, especially the aircraft that would become legendary, the Mitsubishi A6M0, were light, maneuverable, and deadly in the hands of highly trained aviators. But Japan's true strength lay not just in its army or air force. It was the Imperial Japanese Navy that represented the pinnacle of the nation's military power. In the interwar period, Japan had invested heavily in naval technology, doctrine, and training. They built powerful battleships, innovative aircraft carriers, and highly trained naval aviators. Japanese war planners believed that any future conflict with the United States would be decided by naval battles in the Pacific, and they prepared accordingly. The result was a navy that at the start of the war was arguably the most elite in the world. The United States had more industrial potential, but Japan had better trained crews, more experienced pilots, and a doctrine designed around long-range strikes and decisive battles. This combination of ambition, experience, and preparation exploded onto the world stage in December 1941. The attack on Pearl Harbor was not just a bold military strike. It was a demonstration of Japanese reach, coordination, and confidence. The ability to launch a massive carrier-based assault across thousands of kilometers of open ocean, undetected, was something few nations could have pulled off. And Pearl Harbor was only part of a larger offensive sweeping across Asia and the Pacific. In the months that followed, Japan conquered territory at a pace that stunned even its own leaders. Hong Kong, Guam, Wake Island, the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, Burma, the Dutch East Indies, all fell with shocking speed. Japan suddenly controlled an empire stretching from the frigid Aleutian Islands in the north to the dense jungles of New Guinea in the south, from Burma in the west to islands deep in the Central Pacific. This rapid expansion showcased Japan's military strength, planning, and training. They executed complex amphibious assaults, air raids, and coordinated multi-front operations with precision. Their soldiers moved swiftly. Their naval landing forces seized key ports, and their pilots claimed air superiority across vast regions. The Japanese high command believed they had achieved the impossible. They had knocked out major Allied bases, secured vital resources, and bought time to fortify their new empire. But the truth is more complicated. Japan was powerful, far more powerful than many Western leaders had assumed. But its strength had limits that would become painfully clear as the war dragged on. Japan's industry was strong by Asian standards, but dwarfed by the nation it had provoked in the Pacific, the United States. Japan could build advanced aircraft, but not in the quantities needed to replace heavy wartime losses. Japan could train elite pilots, but the training pipeline was slow and demanding. Japan could launch bold offensives, but sustaining armies across thousands of miles of ocean required logistics that stretched even the most capable navy. Yet for a time, Japan's power was undeniable. At the height of its expansion in early 1942, Japan controlled more than 7 million square kilometers of territory and commanded a military force operating from dozens of major bases across the Pacific. It possessed one of the world's largest navies, a battle-hardened army, formidable air forces, and a strategic position that put pressure on every allied nation in the region. But power is not only measured by territory or fleet size. It is measured by endurance, adaptability, and industrial strength. As 1942 progressed, cracks began to appear. Japan had achieved its early victories through careful planning and surprise, but facing a determined, resource-rich enemy like the United States meant the war would become a test of attrition, one Japan was never built to win. Still, the raw might Japan displayed in the opening months of the war remains one of the most dramatic examples of military power projection in history. The question is not whether Japan was powerful. It clearly was. The question is how that power was applied, how it peaked, and how it eventually unraveled under the pressures of a global conflict. Point period. When examining the peak of Japan's military strength in World War II, it is crucial to understand not only the size of its forces, but how they fought. The Imperial Japanese Army was a massive institution, numbering millions of soldiers at its height. But sheer numbers do not tell the full story. What made Japan's army powerful was its unique combination of discipline, adaptability, and a deeply ingrained martial culture. Soldiers were trained to endure extreme hardship, to obey orders without hesitation, and to fight with a tenacity that shocked the Allied troops. Many Japanese units operated under the principle of never surrendering, a doctrine shaped by a mix of cultural values, military training, and government propaganda. This willingness to fight to the last man gave Japan tactical advantages early in the war, especially in jungle and island battles, where small units could hold positions against superior firepower. The Japanese Navy, however, was the jewel of Japan's military machine. At the start of the war, it boasted 10 aircraft carriers, including some of the most advanced carrier groups in the world. Their naval aviation was elite, with pilots trained in rigorous programs that emphasized aerial combat maneuvering, teamwork, and precision. The Zero fighter dominated early air battles, outmaneuvering most Allied aircraft and giving Japan crucial control of the skies. Japanese tactics emphasized aggressive strikes, coordinated torpedo attacks, and the use of long-range aircraft to locate and destroy enemy fleets before they could close in for battle. The Japanese Navy also built some of the world's most impressive battleships, including the Yamato and Musashi, the largest and most heavily armored battleships ever constructed. These floating fortresses embodied Japan's belief in naval supremacy. Although their strategic impact was limited by the shifting realities of naval warfare, their construction demonstrated the industrial and technological reach Japan had achieved. Economically, Japan was strong enough to build this war machine, but not strong enough to sustain it indefinitely. That was the paradox of Japan's power. It could strike with enormous force, but prolonging the conflict drained resources rapidly. Despite this, for much of 1942, Japan retained the initiative. They launched offensives into the Solomon Islands, pushed deep into New Guinea, and threatened Australia's northern approaches. Their submarines prowled vast stretches of the Pacific. Their naval aviation struck with precision. Their armies dug into fortified positions that would take years for the Allies to uproot. Yet the seeds of Japan's decline were already present. The United States, with its vast industrial base, began producing ships, aircraft, and weapons at rates that dwarfed Japan's capacity. American shipyards launched carriers in months, while Japan struggled to replace even a handful of its elite vessels. The American pilot training system produced thousands of aviators, while Japan could not replace the highly experienced pilots lost in battles like Midway. Above all, the United States and its allies learned from early defeats. They adapted tactics, improved aircraft, expanded logistics, and slowly turned the tide. Still, even as the balance shifted, Japan's defensive power remained formidable. The island fortifications Japan constructed across the Pacific were some of the most heavily defended positions in the history of warfare. From Tarawa to Saipan to Iwo Jima to Okinawa, Japanese troops fought with a tenacity that forced the Allies to pay for every inch of ground with time, men, and firepower. These defenses were built into mountains, caves, tunnels, and concrete bunkers. Even when cut off from supply, Japanese soldiers often refused to surrender, prolonging battles long after the outcome was clear. Japan's air power also adapted. New aircraft, such as the Ki-84 and the improved Zero variants, attempted to counter the increasingly advanced American fighters. Though many of these designs were impressive, Japan struggled to produce them in large numbers or equip them with sufficient fuel and ammunition. The lack of experienced pilots was a critical weakness. Japan's early war veterans, who had formed the backbone of its air superiority, were being replaced by hastily trained recruits. Naval power declined as well. The loss of carriers at Midway, the attrition of cruiser and destroyer forces in the Solomon Islands campaign, and the sinking of vital oil tankers crippled Japan's ability to deploy its navy effectively. Even so, the battles fought during this decline demonstrated remarkable courage and tactical brilliance. Japanese naval commanders used night battles, long-range torpedoes, and surprise attacks with devastating skill, causing the Allies heavy losses throughout 1942 and 1943. But power cannot exist in a vacuum. With each passing month, Japan's position became more desperate. Its territories were being cut off. Its cities began suffering severe aerial bombardment. Its economy strained under the pressure of war. And yet, even in 1944 and 1945, when Japan was clearly losing, the nation remained capable of mounting fierce resistance. This ability to keep fighting despite overwhelming odds is itself a testament to Japan's wartime power. It was a power rooted in discipline, nationalism, military tradition, and a belief that surrender was unthinkable. Japan may have lacked the industrial depth to win a prolonged conflict with the United States, but its fighting spirit ensured that the war would be long, costly, and devastating for everyone involved. By 1945, the story of Japan's power in World War II had become one of both remarkable strength and inevitable collapse. The empire that once seemed unstoppable was shrinking rapidly under the combined weight of Allied offensives, bombing campaigns, and catastrophic resource shortages. And yet, even as defeat loomed, the Japanese military continued to fight with determination. To understand Japan's power at the end of the war, you have to think not just in terms of military hardware or industrial output, but in terms of resilience, doctrine, and national will. Japan still possessed millions of soldiers in its home islands and across Asia. Many of these troops were preparing for what they believed would be the final battle, an American invasion of Japan itself. Japanese strategists expected such an invasion to cause millions of casualties on both sides. They planned to mobilize every man, woman, and child to defend the homeland. This willingness to fight to the death was one of Japan's greatest strengths and one of the reasons the war lasted as long as it did. Even without sufficient weapons, fuel, or food, the Japanese military continued to resist. Their defenses on Iwo Jima and Okinawa demonstrated that Japan could turn even small islands into fortresses, capable of withstanding weeks or months of Allied assaults. But this determination came at a cost. Japan's cities were destroyed by firebombing. Factories lay in ruins. Millions were displaced. The Navy, that once dominated the Pacific, had been reduced to a handful of ships. The Air Force had turned increasingly to desperate measures, such as kamikaze attacks, reflecting both bravery and despair. Kamikaze pilots inflicted heavy damage on Allied ships, but they could not change the outcome of the war. They symbolized a shift in Japan's power, from a nation capable of projecting military force across oceans to one fighting for survival with whatever means remained. Despite all this, Japan's military strength had one lasting legacy: the acknowledgement by the Allies that any invasion of Japan would be extraordinarily costly. This recognition influenced strategic decisions at the highest levels. The United States sought ways to force Japan's surrender without launching an invasion that could lead to hundreds of thousands of casualties. The resulting use of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, combined with the Soviet Union's entry into the war against Japan, finally compelled Japan to accept defeat. So how powerful was Japan in World War II? The answer lies somewhere between astonishingly strong and tragically overextended. At its peak, Japan possessed one of the world's most elite navies, highly trained aviators, disciplined armies, advanced warships, and a strategic doctrine that allowed it to conquer vast territories in mere months. Its early war power eclipsed the expectations of most Western nations. Japan's military was capable, ambitious, and technologically innovative. But Japan lacked the industrial capacity to sustain such a massive conflict against a superpower like the United States. Its training systems could not replace losses. Its economy could not produce enough oil or steel. Its strategy was bold, but gambled everything on early victory. Japan's power was real, undeniable, and formidable, but ultimately, it was a power that could win battles, not the war. And yet the legacy of that power lives on, not as a symbol of empire, but as a reminder of the immense strength, skill, and sacrifice displayed by millions of Japanese soldiers, sailors, and airmen and the profound impact that one nation can have on the course of world history.